So let me begin by saying that this is the discussion that we will have today. And in that sense, we will clearly speak largely in the first half, about India's Indo-Pacific understanding. And then, of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have for me, and I will try to answer those questions. Now, the discussion that I will be doing with you for about next 40 minutes is going to focus on Indo-Pacific region and how does India look at Indo-Pacific region. Since you had already a lecture before me on United States approach to North Korea, and I'm sure US approach to larger region of Asia Pacific also must have come in that discussion. I thought I will look at this region now from another perspective, which is where I'm going to discuss a lot of China factor. How has China influenced this Indo-Pacific region? So if you're looking at the map, you see this is largely the area in which this region that we are discussing, Indo-Pacific region, is located. And let me mention this, that maps are very important in our life. Maps give us an identity. For example, Korea is located in Northeast Asia. So whenever in the world you're discussing about North Korea or Korean Peninsula, you discuss about this being located in Northeast Asia. And that gives a certain identity, that it is a peninsula, it is not a landlocked space. It is not a continental space like Australia. This being a peninsula also gives people an identity and influences foreign policy of both North and South Korea. North has a border with China that also influences its foreign policy. South Korea has border with North Korea, which also influences its foreign policy. So where a country is located is very important. It influences its foreign policy. And maps tell us where we are located. Otherwise, all of you are very smart. You know, Earth is like a tennis ball. Not like tennis ball, it is a flat tennis ball. Slightly north, south are not as rounded as equator is. So it's called spheroid. And in a spheroid Earth, there is no north, south, east, west. It is humans, to make it convenient to understand who we are, where we live, what we do, that we make maps. Now, why I'm saying all this is to underline why we are debating Indo-Pacific. Why we cannot live in old style of calling it Indian Ocean on one side and Pacific Ocean on the other. Why are we joining it? We are joining it because we have shifted from 20th century focus on security to 21st century focus on economic development. And economic relationships connect us. Security relations sometimes divided us. So we had friends and we had enemies. But in economic relationship, we also have economic relationship with our enemies. China has very strong relationship with both North and South Korea. China even has a strong relationship with Taiwan, with United States. These are countries which China is not comfortable when it comes to security relationship. So that is why development and economic relationships connect us. And then as the focus shifted from geostrategic to geoeconomics, in 21st century, we thought we need to redefine our maps. We need to redefine our geopolitics. So we are talking now of joining Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. And we are joining that entire region because China has large trade and investment relationship with all these countries. Japan also has relationship with all these countries. Korea has relationship with all these countries. So we notice now that we are also shifting from continent to oceans. compared to Asia Pacific, which was how this region was called in 20th century, we are now looking at the same region from maritime perspective. So we are calling it Indo-Pacific and not Asia Pacific. So that is another thing to understand. What is the difference between Asia Pacific and Indo-Pacific? Asia Pacific was largely Pacific Asia. That means Asia that was facing the Pacific Ocean. So if you see the light yellow color dotted line on your screen and same saffron color given to certain countries, these countries were part of Asia Pacific. Now compared to that, you see a little brown bigger line on your map that goes all the way to Africa's east coast. Now that is the new space which is called Indo-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific now includes much larger part of Indian Ocean than Asia Pacific. Therefore, India is now part of Indo-Pacific region. And that is why we are today discussing what does India think of the Indo-Pacific region. But this map also shows us that when we talk about Indo-Pacific region, we are not talking of whole of Indian Ocean and whole of Pacific Ocean. For example, you see the area which is highlighted in a deeper blue color on your map now. That is the region. So it basically looks at largely the eastern part of the Pacific and western part of the Indian Ocean region. And you can see that your own South Korea is now on the edge of this new region called Indo-Pacific. It's sitting on the edge of that region, and this whole littoral, the coastal areas are joined by this maritime perspective because much of world's trade is happening on oceans. 95% of world trade happens through oceans, and oceans are important. We are depending on ocean on everything now, from food to pleasure to leisure to tourism to all kinds of natural and mineral resources. So we are engaging with oceans much more. And it is in that region, along with the South Korea, you see China and India are also part of that Indo-Pacific region. These are two big countries in middle of that Indo-Pacific region. And because the focus has now shifted on economic relationship and development, the focus has also shifted on human beings, not just states. Thanks to technology, information and communication technology, transport technology, world is so much connected now. For example, if you look back about 30, 40 years, to talk to any foreigner, you would need permission from your state, you will need state institutions to facilitate that. Now we can talk to each other without any help from the state. So world is connected and human beings are connected, and therefore focus is shifting from state to society and human beings. And you see, this is where population is largest. Not just China and India are now in the center of Indo-Pacific geopolitics or Indo-Pacific region, which is the region of focus. In 20th century, the focus was North Atlantic. Focus was military competition between Soviet Union and its allies with NATO and its allies. NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization of Western European countries. So there was much more tension between East Europe and West Europe, and North Atlantic was the focus. Now Asia Pacific has become focused thanks to enormous economic development. South Korea itself has shown an example of rapid growth and your GDP is almost hitting $2 billion now, $2 trillion now. It's growing very fast. But when we talk about where are human beings living, you notice that China has 1.4 billion people and India has 1.38 billion people. Maybe when I'm speaking, India has already overtaken China in terms of size of population. Compared to that, the most powerful country, United States, has only 1/4 of the size of population uh, of India and China. So population is the focus, and that makes China and India the focus. For example, 35% of all human beings live in China and India. And therefore, of course, we understand world is dominated by United States, and Indo-Pacific is, all debate is focused on what United States is thinking and what United States is doing. We'll come to that. But this is where people are living. People are living in China and India. Now, within China and India, why I want to focus more on China is because there is a big change. China and India may have similar population, but the productivity, the capacity to produce of people in India and China has changed. Until 1990, their GDP was very similar. China and India GDP was very similar. India was 297 billion and China was 309 billion. Very close to each other. But in last 40 years, you see, big change. Last year, India's GDP was 2.7 trillion, but China's GDP now 16 trillion. And that makes China economically very, very powerful country. In fact, in purchasing power parity calculations, China is already world's largest economy, not United States. Only in current dollar terms, United States is now $21 trillion and China only $16 trillion. So in current dollar terms, yes, China is number 2 now. Similarly, in purchasing power parity, India is world's 3rd largest economy after China, United States and India. And in current dollar terms, India is 6th largest economy in the world. China's rise is also recent, as I mentioned. You notice here in the next chart that you're seeing that under various leaders, 5 leaders that China has had, this is the 5th generation leadership. There is also debate as to whether Xi Jinping will continue to rule China or there will be a 6th generation of leaders in China. But big change have started happening after Deng Xiaoping and particularly under Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. And now Xi Jinping. That is where economic rise of China has happened. And economic rise of China happened primarily as a manufacturing factory of the world. So China offered itself with big population, with big land, much attractive possibilities for Western companies. So all the American, European companies came and invested in China. And China became factory of the world. So here China, in this chart you see, which is of 2018, China produces virtually 1/3 of world's total production. World has about 193 countries, but only one single China produces almost 30% of world's total production. United States is the 2nd largest, but it is only half of China. Japan is the next at 7%, 1/4 of China. Like that, you can also notice other countries. India is also now in the picture with 3%, which is 10 times. So China's production is 10 times compared to India's production. That also makes China the biggest exporter of the world. But we understand that much of these exports are not really Chinese. These are foreign companies manufacturing in China and exporting from China. So sometimes that interesting difference must be understood. But of course, when we count exports of China, China has become the largest exporting country for almost 10 years now. And third largest is Germany, fourth largest is Japan, you can see in that equation, of course. And you have also South Korea listed among these top 10 countries. But it is interesting to note that China has moved from exports to also now investments. So China is focusing also much more on investing, and it has started from 2013 onwards something called Belt and Road Initiative. Itailu, Chinese call it. In English now they call it Belt and Road Initiative, but in Chinese they still call it Itailu. One belt, one road. And that is seeing China's influence increasing around the world in building infrastructure, roads, railways, ports, new smart cities. But China has not only moved from trade to investment, China has also moved to brand building. China has now many brands which are international brands. Alibaba, Tencent, ZTE, so many, Huawei. And that is where China is now beginning to compete with many of the other global brands. For example, with Samsung, with Hyundai, it is now beginning to show some competition in global brands. South Korea has many famous global brands. But China is also now moving to become a country which can have such important brands. But the focus, it seems, right now is much more on Eurasian continent and Europe, and not so much on Latin America. You can see this chart here of Belt and Road Initiative. Much of these corridors, as China calls it, are being built to connect China to Eurasia and to Europe, and to some extent to United States as well, and to North America and South America. But at least in terms of trade, China already has emerged United States' largest trading partner. This is a chart which is again a little dated chart, which shows that Mexico is the largest trading partner of United States, followed by Canada, because they had this special free trade area agreement called NAFTA, North American Free Trade Area. But China is now overtaking. China is virtually now reaching almost $1 trillion trade per year with the United States, despite tensions. You remember, I said in security focus, countries were divided as East and West, North and South. But in focus, when the focus shifts to economic development and economic relationship, investments, trade, then even countries which are not comfortable with each other, there can be trade, there can be investments. So China now has enormous trade with the United States, even when the relationship is complex. So in that kind of picture emerging, how has China influenced India's Indo-Pacific vision? How does India see Indo-Pacific with focus on China in that sense? China is India's big neighbor, and we have had many problems with China also. So India sees China as the main trigger, because China is world's largest economy in purchasing power terms. China is world's largest trading country. China's Belt and Road Initiative is becoming global. Of course, United States and European allies are also starting many programs of investments at global level. But China's Belt and Road Initiative is big. So in that sense, the focus shifting to economic relationship, China has become the main trigger, main reason for this need for reimagination from separate Indian Ocean and Pacific Oceans to now Indo-Pacific Ocean or Indo-Pacific region becoming the new geopolitical framework of understanding international relations or foreign policy. But what is most interesting is that this new debate, new narrative of Indo-Pacific geopolitics is led still by United States and its friends and allies. South Korea is part of that debate. Australia is leading player in pushing for that Indo-Pacific region. as a geopolitical framework, because Australia sees itself no longer as a country which is called down under, but a country that now lies at the very center of Indo-Pacific geopolitical framework. So here, in that debate and in that relationship and new initiatives, China has remained almost an outlier. China is not central. China is not part and parcel of those debates. Even if China is the reason why that new reimagination is happening, China is not seen as part of those debates and part of those initiatives. And it is not a fault of United States and its friends and allies. China has also remained reluctant to participate in Indo-Pacific debates. In fact, Chinese have started a parallel debate on what they call building a community of shared future of humankind. They think that is a parallel debate that Chinese want to push. And one main reason why the Chinese are reluctant to debate and participate in Indo-Pacific initiatives is because Indo-Pacific sees South China Sea as central hub. If you remember the map that I showed you, you would remember that South China Sea comes at the very center of that Indo-Pacific imagination. And Chinese are very sensitive to how they see South China Sea and how other countries see South China Sea. Other countries believe that this is open space, it's an open ocean, and everyone should have an equal access to that maritime region. Chinese think it is their sovereign territory, it is their sovereign maritime space. So there is a misunderstanding there, there's a problem here, and that's why Chinese don't want to get into these debates. And they are not part of any of these narratives and initiatives. And why is that happening so far? Partly because Chinese are finding it very difficult to work with America, United States and its friends and allies because of historical memories. Chinese still live in 20th century experience, 20th century history, and they still remember some of the things that influence them being very reluctant to engaging and participating in the Indo-Pacific region. Because many of you perhaps may have read that in Asia, just like Soviet Union was the focus of American policies in Europe, China was focus of American policies in Asia. In Asia, just as Japan and Korea became close allies of United States had also initially tried to create something like NATO in Asia. NATO in Europe is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Like that, United States tried to create something called Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, or SEATO, for Pacific Asia. And similarly tried to create CENTO, Central Treaty Organization, which was earlier called Baghdad Pact, for Indian Ocean. But that NATO kind of structures did not survive in this Asian Asian region, because Asian countries were very diverse. Asian countries are not like Europe, where you have mostly Christian population, you have mostly similar size and similar kind of political systems. Asia has very different kind of setup. Asia has very different sizes. China's size versus South Korea's size is very different. We have all the religions here. We have all different levels of development. So NATO kind of thing did not work in Asia for United States. So in Asia, United States started something called hub and spokes strategy, which means United States will have a bilateral alliance like with South Korea, like with Japan, or with Philippines, or with Singapore, and use that bilateral alliance to also engage other friendly countries in the region. So there is a hub and it has spokes around it. So hub and spokes is what the United States followed in Asia. And it tried another method of creating or encouraging creation of ASEAN, Association for Southeast Asian Nations, which is a soft network of using diplomacy to contain China. So the focus was to contain the spread of communism from China, just like it was in Europe to contain the spread of communism from Soviet Union. So Chinese still believe that China is the focus, and the United States has continued to focus on controlling, containing, restraining China. And even today, if you see, United States has enormous presence in this region, military presence in this region, and Chinese feel worried that this is only meant to contain rise of China. For example, in South Korea itself, as the map shows you here, has about 28,000 plus American soldiers in South Korea. And Japan has much larger, about 50,000 soldiers. Sometimes both in Korea and Japan, there are people who are not happy with that. Also, United States has a military base in Guam, for example, or in Philippines, or in Australia. More recently, they have put up some of their Marines in Darwin in north and in Perth in the west, or in Singapore and Thailand and other places. So United States has continued with that kind of military approach, and Chinese particularly feel worried, so they do not want to come and join these activities of initiatives and debates about Indo-Pacific. They have tried to stay away from this, and they have tried to do parallel things. For example, what is interesting here is the collapse of Soviet Union had coincided with the Asia Pacific, with the US focus on Asia Pacific, because they saw that China could be now the next challenge. Russia is no longer as big challenge. In fact, many documents that come out of United States describe China as the main competitor. They don't call it enemy, they don't call it adversary, they call China as the major competitor, and they believe that China is trying to displace United States from the Indian Ocean region in that sense. So what are Chinese doing? They are doing parallel things. Beijing Olympic in 2008 is an important inflection point, is an important point in history when China shifted from what was the old style of Deng Xiaoping, saying the second leader, Deng Xiaoping, advised China's leaders to what he called hide your strengths and bide your time and do not seek global leadership. Now Chinese are saying that time is over. We are now ready to take on global leadership responsibilities. And Beijing Olympics, using the sports instead of military, was an example of showcasing that new China has arrived. And Americans understood that. And that is why President Obama shifted the focus to Asia Pacific. And it was called that the foreign policy of America would now have pivoted to Asia. Trump president actually launched an Indo-Pacific strategy where he said China is trying to displace United States in this region and we need to do something about it. So he renamed American Pacific Naval Command into Indo-Pacific Naval Command and expanded its responsibilities also to include part of the east coast of India. President Trump also focused on China in a very confrontationist method of trade and technology wars. He revived something called Five Eyes network of intelligence agencies of Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and the United States to keep an eye on what Chinese are doing. United States has also led something called Quadrilateral Security Framework, which has Australia, Japan, India, and United States. United States recently launched AUKUS security framework, which is Australia, United Kingdom, and US, which is going to deploy nuclear submarines. And this kind of constant initiatives of United States to focus on expanding influence of China have received a certain hit during the pandemic. You have seen that many countries, including yours and mine, and most of all United States, where about 500,000 people have actually died. Pandemic has changed equations because US economy has shrunk during the pandemic, but Chinese economy has expanded during the pandemic. And that is very unusual. So where does India see itself in the Indo-Pacific region today? With China becoming such an important factor, you have to understand India and China have had world's largest boundary dispute. And for last 2 years, there is enormous tension on that border. Now, therefore, what India sees for itself is that India's very close friend, Soviet Union, has collapsed, and India's adversary, China, has emerged as a major influence. And that has led to Indian foreign policy being redefined, and it has seen India growing really close to United States and all its friends and allies, including South Korea. And therefore, India's focus has shifted over a period of time from its policy focusing on what is called Look East policy to Act East policy. India had nuclear tests, and India is now getting enormously close to United States and its friends and allies. And that change has been further accelerated because of constant rise of China, but also constant increasing tensions between China and India. And that asymmetry has made India much more dependent on United States relationship, and India has rejoined the quadrilateral security framework of United States. India's engagement, and that is my second last slide, and I think my time also is coming close now to stopping this initial presentation. India's engagement in the Indo-Pacific has to be understood from India's focus on East in general. India has China in the north and Pakistan in the west. So in north and west, India has had difficult relationship. Therefore, India started focusing on East. Second reason why India started focusing on East is the big global shift from security to economic development that I mentioned to you. And when the focus shifted from geostrategy or geosecurity to geoeconomics and development, India noticed that Southeast Asian countries were now being called tiger economies. South Korea is one of those tiger economies. There was this flying geese is bird. When you see these birds flying in the sky, you see arrow shape. So this was called flying geese model, where enormous economic rise of Japan had led to official development assistance to many of these countries in Southeast Asia, including South Korea. And these economies emerging as tiger economies, and they were on the east of India. And when India wanted to focus on economic relationship, it could not go north, it could not go west, it went east. So from 1990, India started talking of Look East policy, which has now from 2014 become Act East policy. And now we are talking of Connect East policy, we are talking of Act Far East policy, which is going all the way to Vladivostok. So the focus in any case was moving to east. And India, if you look at the map, is Indian Peninsula jets out into Indian Ocean. So India is an Indian Ocean country. So India being an Indian Ocean country now already for last 40 years connecting to the east, automatically had India's constant growing interest in what is now called Indo-Pacific region. More recently, India has started focusing on new initiatives like SAGAR, S-A-G-A-R, is 2015 enunciation of India's policy called Security and Growth for All in the Region, which means Indian Ocean region. So security and growth have to be combined. India has also started taking much more interest in BIMSTEC, which is Bay of Bengal Initiative for multisectoral technical and economic cooperation, which is Bay of Bengal littoral countries. India was president of UN Security Council in August last year, and India outlined its maritime vision. India in 2018 also launched something called Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. So India is also showing itself enormous engagement with the region, which is pushed now increasingly by rise of China and India-China tensions and India's proximity to United States and all its friends and allies, including South Korea. But India's vision of the region still is defined by Indian Prime Minister's speech in 2018 June at Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. Every year, Singapore has this annual dialogue where all the regional leaders come and speak, and Indian Prime Minister had outlined the vision of India, saying that India would not like to see this region militarized. And you can notice that United States has enormous military presence in the region. And also saying that Indo-Pacific should not become an exclusive club of few countries and we should keep it open. So now Indian policy of Indo-Pacific region talks about India wanting to see Indo-Pacific as open. Chinese may not like it, free, Chinese may not like it, secure and prosperous region, because Chinese see South China Sea part as their maritime territory, whereas American policy and American friends policies are about making sure that Indo-Pacific, including South China Sea, remains open and free and secure. India, of course, also supports what is called Quad Plus or expanded Quad. The last Secretary Banguen, Secretary of Defense Banguen of Trump administration had started dialogue during the beginning of pandemic with these additional 3 countries, in addition to the 4 quadrilateral framework countries. 4 countries of quadrilateral security framework are Australia, Japan, India, and United States. And Quad Plus includes South Korea, Vietnam, and New Zealand. United States is also trying to have an important military relationship with Vietnam in that sense. It already has a good relationship with New Zealand and South Korea. So India supports that Quad or quadrilateral security framework should be expanded to become Quad Plus to include these 3 countries. But India believes that it should also be open to including in future countries like Russia and China, and they should be part of these debates and maybe in future initiatives. Let me now look at the larger Indian foreign policy's vision, which will help you understand how India would behave in future. Indian foreign policy has been based on the axis of what you may have heard, some of you may have heard something called non-alignment. And non-alignment meant India did not want to align either with the East or with the West, which is either with the NATO or with Warsaw Treaty Organization. India wanted to be non-aligned country. But Cold War finished and there was no competition between East and West, and now Indian foreign policy is based on strategic autonomy. That independence of India's foreign policy is very important, but independence has to be understood in long term, and in short term, tactical maneuvers can be made in terms of shifting policies for a brief period of time. And here India talks of co-engagement, containment, but also engagement with China. So just as India has joined the quadrilateral security framework, India has also joined, India has been part of Russia, India, China strategic triangle, or BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So India continues to engage China despite all the tensions. But when it comes to some initiatives like RCEP that was signed last year, became effective from this year, South Korea is part of RCEP. It is Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. India felt this was too much dominated by China. It had become China-led. Originally, it was an ASEAN initiative, but over time it became China-led initiative. Just like the United States Trans-Pacific Partnership is also now becoming increasingly China-led. It is now being called comprehensive TPP in that sense. So India therefore refused to join this. So India is not accepting everything that China wants to see India doing. But India is now at the same time, when it comes to Indo-Pacific, is trying to build consensus about ASEAN centrality. All countries around the Indo-Pacific region, including China, South Korea, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, United States, India, they all believe that the whole focus of Indo-Pacific should believe in centrality of ASEAN. ASEAN should remain at center and as the driver of all these debates and discussions and initiatives. Earlier, you have seen ASEAN was at the center of these discussions. ASEAN had started something called ASEAN Regional Forum. ASEAN had also started something called East Asian Summits. So ASEAN was seen in the leadership position because none of the big countries can be allowed to take lead. In fact, ASEAN was acceptable to everybody because ASEAN will not hurt the core interests of any of the big powers. But it seems now ASEAN centrality is coming under certain amount of threat because of the direct contestation between US and China. China is trying to lead one kind of narrative, US is trying to lead another kind of narrative. But many of the US friends and allies, including India and South Korea, are saying ASEAN centrality is important. And India is trying to connect very closely to AOIP, which is ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, and IPOI, which is Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative of India. And in that context, in November last year, addressing the 30th anniversary celebrations of China and ASEAN, the speech of President Xi Jinping for the first time used the expression Indo-Pacific. They never use expression Indo-Pacific. They always say Asia-Pacific. And that gives a certain indication that China may be willing to come and join these debates or maybe potentially initiatives of Indo-Pacific region. And that is a kind of future which one is looking at as a possibility. But we don't know how things will happen. As of now, tensions continue. Currently, of course, the much focus has shifted to Ukraine. And since the whole world is focusing on Ukraine, China's assertive policies in the region against its neighbors are kind of not in focus as of now. Let me stop here. Thank you, everyone, for peacefully listening to me. And I'm looking forward to your questions and even comments, and I'll try to answer them. But in case any of you later wishes to connect with me, please note my email, which is SSING. So remember the double S, SSING H and at JNU, which is my university, and AC and India. With that, I will hand it back to Professor Joe, and he will direct me as to how we go from here.